The city lights blurred as Mark reversed the van. He was exhausted. The long drive had taken its toll, and the endless stream of headlights and neon signs had become a dizzying blur. The hum of the city was a constant reminder of the new life they were about to embark on. They had been driving all day. John, his friend and soon-to-be roommate, hopped out, stretching his stiff limbs. The journey had been filled with moments of silence, punctuated by bursts of conversation about their hopes and fears for this new chapter. The weight of their decision hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. Finally, he muttered, yawning. Finding an apartment in this bustling city had been a nightmare. The process had been grueling, with countless viewings and rejections. Each no had chipped away at their enthusiasm, but they had persevered, driven by the promise of a fresh start. Every place they saw was either too expensive or downright depressing. The city, with all its opportunities, seemed to mock them with its unattainable luxury and hidden squalor. They had walked through hallways that smelled of decay and peeked into rooms that felt like cages. The dream of a perfect apartment seemed to slip further away with each passing day. After weeks of searching, they stumbled upon an ad for a spacious two-bedroom flat at a surprisingly reasonable price. It was a beacon of hope in their sea of despair. The ad promised everything they had been looking for: space, light, and affordability. It felt like a sign, a small miracle in the midst of their struggle. The photographs showed a bright, airy apartment with large windows and a view of the park. It seemed too good to be true. The images painted a picture of tranquility and comfort, a stark contrast to the chaos of the city outside. They could almost hear the birds chirping and feel the sunlight streaming in through those large windows. John, ever the optimist, convinced Mark it was a stroke of luck. He had a way of seeing the silver lining in every cloud, and his enthusiasm was infectious. Mark wanted to believe him, to trust that this was the break they had been waiting for. They had spent hours discussing the possibilities, dreaming of the life they would build in that apartment. Now, staring at the nondescript building in front of them, Mark felt a flicker of doubt. It looked old, forgotten. The facade was unremarkable, blending into the background of the cityscape. It was a far cry from the vibrant images they had seen online. The reality of the situation began to sink in, and Mark couldn't help but wonder if they had made a mistake. The paint was peeling, and the few visible windows seemed to stare back at them like vacant eyes. The building exuded an air of neglect, as if it had been abandoned by time itself. The sense of unease grew stronger, gnawing at the edges of Mark's mind. He tried to shake it off, reminding himself that appearances could be deceiving. John, sensing his friend's unease, clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get inside," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness of the evening. His confidence was unwavering, a steady anchor in the sea of uncertainty. Mark took a deep breath and followed him, hoping that the interior would tell a different story. As they hauled their belongings up the narrow, dimly lit staircase, Mark couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, and every creak of the floorboards sent a shiver down his spine. The building felt alive, as if it were breathing, watching, waiting. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowy figure lurking behind them. The oppressive silence was broken only by their footsteps and the occasional distant sound of the city. Mark's imagination ran wild, conjuring images of unseen watchers and hidden dangers. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but the sense of dread was hard to ignore. Reaching the third floor, they finally stood before flat 303. John fished out the keys and unlocked the door. The moment felt surreal, a culmination of their efforts and dreams. The number 303 inches seemed to hold a promise, a new beginning. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement to face whatever lay beyond that door together. The air inside was stale and thick with the silence of a place long uninhabited. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the grimy windows. The apartment felt frozen in time, a relic of a past life. The silence was almost tangible, pressing down on them like a heavy blanket. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant images they had seen online. Mark shivered, suddenly overwhelmed by a wave of inexplicable unease. He told himself it was just the exhaustion from the move. But deep down, a primal instinct whispered a warning. The apartment felt wrong, as if it were hiding secrets in its shadows. He tried to rationalize his feelings, attributing them to the stress of the day, but the sense of dread was hard to shake. Something felt off about this place. Ignoring the growing sense of dread, he forced a smile and followed John inside. They had come too far to turn back now. The apartment was their new home, and they had to make the best of it. Mark tried to focus on the positives, the potential that the space held, but the unease lingered, a constant undercurrent to his thoughts. They had a new home now, and everything was going to be all right. At least, that's what he kept telling himself as the door clicked shut behind them, sealing them within the silent embrace of flat 303. The sound of the door closing echoed in the stillness, a finality that sent a chill down Mark's spine. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of foreboding. This was their chance to start anew, and he was determined to make it work, no matter what. The following days were consumed by the mundane chaos of unpacking. The apartment, though dusty and in dire need of a fresh coat of paint, was indeed spacious. The living room was large enough to accommodate their mismatched furniture, and the bedrooms, though smaller, had a certain charm. As they gradually settled into a routine, the initial unease Mark felt began to dissipate. John, ever the social butterfly, quickly befriended their elderly neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, who lived across the hall. They were a peculiar but harmless couple, always eager to share stories of the building's history. It was during one such conversation that Mrs. Dursley, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, mentioned that flat 303 had been vacant for an unusually long time. Previous tenants didn't stay long, she said, her rheumy eyes fixed on Mark. He brushed off her cryptic comment, attributing it to the ramblings of an old woman. He was determined to make this apartment their home, a sanctuary from the chaos of the city. They fell into a comfortable routine. John, a freelance writer, spent his days hunched over his laptop, the clatter of keys, his constant companion. Mark, a graphic designer, worked from his makeshift studio in the spare bedroom, the glow of his computer screen illuminating the otherwise dark apartment late into the night. Life seemed almost normal, almost. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a sinister undercurrent began to stir. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a single discordant note in an otherwise harmonious melody. A floorboard creaking when no one was around. The distinct feeling of being watched while alone in a room. The faint scent of lavender perfume lingering in the air, even though neither he nor John used it. Mark initially dismissed these occurrences as figments of his imagination, but as the days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences became more frequent, more insistent. His unease, once a mere flicker, began to grow into a raging inferno of dread. One evening, while John was out meeting a client, Mark found himself alone in the apartment. He was working late, the only sounds the hum of his computer and the distant wail of a siren. Lost in his work, he didn't notice the subtle changes in the atmosphere at first. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The temperature dropped, sending a chill down his spine. He felt a presence behind him, a sensation so real that he whipped around, heart pounding, expecting to find someone standing in the doorway. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, swallowed by darkness. He tried to rationalize the experience, attributing it to stress and overwork, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Later that night, as he lay in bed, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling gnawing at his insides, he heard it. A soft, melodic hum, like a child singing a lullaby. It seemed to emanate from the wall separating his bedroom from the spare room, which remained largely untouched and filled with boxes. The sound sent chills down his spine. He had been alone in the apartment all evening. He strained his ears, listening intently, but the sound faded as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind an eerie silence. The next morning, he recounted the experience to John, who listened with a mixture of amusement and skepticism. "You're working too hard," John said, laughing. "This place is starting to get to you." Mark wanted to believe him. He desperately wanted to dismiss it all as a figment of his imagination, but the events of the previous night played on loop in his mind, fueling his growing sense of unease. The apartment, once a haven, felt more and more like a gilded cage, its walls closing in on him, suffocating him with unseen dread. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss, something sinister lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly normal lives, and he knew with chilling certainty that he was right.